Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to take a look at the comic book survey that I did a few months ago. And this was a survey that I put out there to the comic book community. Of course, a lot of the people were subscribers to my channel. But we put this survey out there and we basically waited for people to respond to the survey. And then I closed it down after a couple of weeks. And so in this video, we are going to take a look at and discuss some of the findings from that survey. And I will tell you that I have glanced at the results. I have not spent a ton of time digging into the details or doing any kind of calculations. We're basically going to look at this thing and we're going to talk through it. And then I'll be looking for what you all think, right? Because what I'm going to be doing is giving you my interpretation of the data. Some of you may have a slightly different appreciation for what you're seeing and or some questions that you would wonder about based upon what it is that we're going to see. Before we look at the details, I want to take a moment to invite you, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release here from the channel on a weekly basis. So with that said, I'm actually going to share my screen with you, and then we are going to take a look at this survey. And to be honest with you, I haven't seen anybody out there do a survey of this sort. This is actually the second survey that we've done because I was curious. As a marketer, I believe in market research. I believe in taking data from a pool of people and being able to draw from that some assumptions, right? If your pool is a sizable one and it is a representation of the larger audience, you can make some assumptions. So here, one of the great things about this is that we had 280 respondents. With this particular question, we had 279 people that chose to respond, one that abstained. So just keep that in mind that there are 280. So you'll see numbers in here where some people answered some questions and did not answer others. We don't know who did what, but we do know that the top number is 280 and then everything else kind of ticks down from there. So the very first question that is on this survey is, what do you consider yourself to be? And what we see here is that 97% of people that responded basically said, I am a comic book collector. The next highest, 172 people, or 62% basically said they are a reader of comics, omnibuses, and graphic novels. And then the next highest is right here, speculator and investor. And there were 43% of people that said that they were speculators. And you can kind of see cover hunters is about 107. And then very last, omnibus graphic novel collectors. Now, what's important about this one is that people had the ability to check more than one response. And this was important. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. I realize that that's a little small. What's great about this question is that there are a lot of people that are out there that are saying that speculators are ruining our hobby, right? But what this data essentially tells us is the vast majority of speculators are probably also collectors, right? People are collecting comics and or reading comics. Those are the top two, right? They are collecting and or reading because that's their interest. And my belief, and I think it kind of plays out here in the data, that yes, there are speculators and investors, but oftentimes they are the collectors and the readers, right? We are the speculators, right? And we are buying and selling comics in order to buy and sell other comics, right? You buy a couple of modern comics, you turn around, you sell them because you're going to go buy some Silver Age stuff, or because you want to buy some other, modern stuff that really interests you. So this was a very important question, because if this speculator line was really, really high, and or if the comic collector line or the reader line were also really, really low, I would be a little concerned. But the fact that these things are high, I think is a good thing. Now, one of the things that can be said about this data, because I want to give you the pros and cons, is that my channel isn't really about speculation. And so potentially, if my channel were more focused on speculation, we would have more speculators that watch the show, therefore more speculators that would actually, take part in the survey. And so because there may be a bias because of the type of content that I do, I had to acknowledge that point. And again, I want to play both sides of this because, you can tell one story if you ignore the other side of the data, but we're not going to do that. This was probably not my finest question, right? But what I was trying to get to here is that there are people that are cover hunters, right? Out of the 279 respondents, 107 people said, hey, I am a cover hunter. So my question was, who is your preferred artist? What I didn't realize that the thing would do is that it would not necessarily tabulate and compile these into some kind of pie chart. I literally have 134 individual responses, which is a little tough because it doesn't really lend itself to analysis. But you see names in here over and over, like your Jim Lee, your Peach Momoka, your Alex Ross, Mike Mayhew, my good friend Mark Bagley is in here. Francisco Matina, Andy Gronoff. I mean, you see some of the names over and over, but I wish that I had set this up a different way and wish it would actually give us a pie chart of the most common responses, because I think that would have been a better way for us to actually look at this data. So unfortunately, I did not do a good job on the way that I set this question up, but it is what it is. So down here, my question was, if you are a collector, how long have you been collecting? Because that's also something that I'm very interested in, right? And what we see here is that roughly 57% of people have been collecting for 12 or more years. That is 156 respondents out of 275 that are collecting for 12 or more years, which is really impressive. Now equally impressive, on the other end of the spectrum, you have 16% of people, or about 45 individuals, that have been collecting for about 1 to 3 years. And then you also have another 10 or so that have been collecting for less than a year. Again, these are good signs, right? I think that the lower end of the spectrum is good because it shows that new people are coming to my channel, but then also new people are potentially coming into the hobby as well. While at the same time, we have some people that have been in the hobby for a long period of time. And in my mind, I believe that we need all types of people. We need some of the people that have been around for a while, and we also need new folks. And of course, we need those individuals in the middle. So you can see here about 16% of people have been collecting somewhere between 4 to 7 years. And then there's a smaller group here that have been collecting somewhere between 8 and 11 years. None of this data in my mind is bad. None of this data is bad. It shows a healthy market, if you will, a healthy hobby. I mean, you always want to see new people, and you always want to see people that have been around for a while. So I view this as good data. But one of the other questions that I actually put in here based upon some feedback from Lee was, if you are a collector, have you been collecting for consecutive years? Because that's also important, right? Have you been doing this? Like, you've been doing it 12 years. Is it a solid 12? Or has it been broken up with time? And basically what we see here is that 54%, the vast majority, 54.4%, have not been collecting for consecutive years. So they basically had some starts and stops over their lifetime, which lends itself to the age that we'll look at a little bit later. But we have some people that have started and stopped, over the course of their lives, but it adds up again to, these numbers that we looked at just above in terms of the consecutive years. But there is a group, there are 125 individuals that have indeed been collecting for consecutive years. And again, not a terrible balance, balance between these two things. So scrolling down. And if not consecutive years, one of the questions was, what brought you back to the hobby, right? Because that was one of the things, right? It's like, if you haven't been like in the game all this time just because you just love comics, what was it that actually attracted you and caught your attention and brought you back to the hobby? We thought that that was another really good question. And so a couple of things here. This is, again, individual responses. So we have about 166 responses for those that said no. So we had 149 up here that said no, not consecutive, but 166 responses. So friend, the movies close, I guess, proximity to an LCS. Somebody's wife was like, you need a stress reliever, go read some funny papers. DC Rebirth, someone says. Scrolling through, someone says, I'm still in my first year. So there you go. My wife bought me the Killing Joke Deluxe Edition. I wonder how many wives are in here. Friend and the MCU, definitely. Person says, I was short on cash and simply had no funds to do anything other than the 3 series. Thankfully, my financial woes turned around. It's basically what this person is saying. Somebody found some things on the bus, which is kind of cool, right? Found a couple of comics on the bus, and that sparked them up again. Another wife mentioned here, time and wife encouraged me to collect again. That is definitely my story. So I appreciate that. Picked up some non-superhero trade paperbacks and rediscovered my fondness for comics. Time and money, a friend, nostalgia. I like this one right here. Honestly, it was Regie Collects. And some guy named Neil Gaiman. I mean, and Sandman, whatever that is. House of X and Powers of 10. Shout out to that one. I definitely appreciate that. I used to be poor, not so much. That's awesome. But there are 166 really fantastic comments. You know, more disposable income than earlier in life. How many of us can get on board with that after discovering slab comics? That is part of what brought them back. Those are fantastic right there. Second and Charles, shout out. So for those, my other question here was, how were you first introduced to comics, right? Because whether you've been collecting consecutively or not, I want to know, like, what got you started, right? And you can see that the top 3 responses, number 1, self-starters. These are people that are like, hey, I wanted to read comics, whether I was as a kid or as an adult. I decided I wanted to do it, so I did it. 27% say family. So my guess here is that it's either the significant other, the grandparents, or the parents, or a cousin. That also seems to be a big entry point for a lot of people who do not have older siblings. Cousins played a very important role. And then a friend at 15.5%. So again, really nice stuff here. And then you can see there's a ton of just individual responses here that television. Oh, let's look at this one. This one right here, movies. My guess is that some of these individual responses here will probably ladder back to movies and TV shows. That is my guess. But I guess enough people didn't just say the word movie, therefore that one didn't flag. So, but again, pretty interesting how it is that people were first introduced to comics. Next over here, I wanted to kind of ask, what publishers do people collect, read, or buy for whatever reason, whether they're a speculator, investor, or not, whether they're a reader, cover hunter. My question was, what publishers do you go after? And we can see here, not by a crazy margin, which is a little shocking, not by a crazy margin. We can see here that Marvel is there with 96%. 96.4% of 279 respondents say that they collect, read, or buy Marvel, followed by DC at 89% or 247 respondents. So not a crazy difference between Marvel at 269 and DC at 247. Not bad. You have a little bit of a drop off here as you go down to Image. We can see Boom Studios down here with about 44% or 123 people. Valiant is creeping in there, and then Ablaze is on here, and so is Vault. And Vault is a little surprising to me, to be honest with you. I only know of one Vault comic, right? So that was a little shocking there. And I would love to take credit for Ablaze. I would love to take credit for that with Gung Ho, but these guys are doing some really awesome stuff out there. So shout out to Ablaze and all of the other publishers that are represented here on the list. And I probably could have added several others And maybe I will in a future survey when we decide to go ahead and do this again. And one other thing I'll tell you is that this survey had 280 respondents. The last time we did this, we had 200 respondents and 201 if you include me. So very pleased with the, I think the improved response to the survey. So if you completed this, I want to say thank you for taking the time to do so. And if you didn't, I want to encourage you next time we do the survey to please take some time to complete it. Over here, which publisher constitutes your top pickup? And I defined it as the bulk of what you read and buy. And so we can see here that Marvel has basically 69% of what their top picks are, followed by again DC and then Image. So you can see again the top three right there. And it's almost like Pac-Man, man. Marvel is definitely king of the hill here with that. But just again, 277 respondents with this one, with Marvel definitely taking the lion's share of things, and then Ablaze and Valiant not necessarily even showing up because of the percentages of the other two. Next, I wanted to kind of better understand how many comics people are actually buying per week. And I didn't specify whether it was new comics or old comics. I really just wanted to understand, how many comics are people actually buying from week to week? And you can see here that we literally had every single respondent respond to this question at 280. I think this is the first one that is actually at 280. But over here, what you can see is that, 46.4% of people are buying somewhere between 6 and 15 comics per week. That is actually a lot of comics, especially if they're on the upper end of that spectrum. But that's a healthy number of comics, somewhere between 6 and 15 comics. And again, 280 people, a total of 130 people are actually doing that on a weekly basis. Next up, we have a healthy percentage of those that are buying 5 or less, 5 or fewer comics. 114 people, or about 41%. And then you have a couple of other numbers here. You have a small contingent of about 18 people that buy 25 or more comics. And then you have an additional 18 individuals that are buying somewhere between 16 and 25 comics. So again, it's just interesting to see the distribution of how people are spending their money on a weekly basis. And maybe in a future survey, what we'll do is we'll break this out to say, okay, if you're buying this many comics, how many of these are new comics that you are buying on New Comic Book Day versus not new comics? And I don't know how I'll phrase that, but it might be interesting to see the spectrum of what people are buying across new versus old or not new comics. So maybe we'll make that modification the next time. And again, one of the things I don't want to do is to make this a 100-question survey. And that the program that I use isn't the most sophisticated to have like if this then that, or answer yes then you get this question versus no and you get this one. It's not that sophisticated, so it's neither here nor there. So one of my next questions was, how often do you use social media to talk about comics? Because in my mind, social media is one of the greatest things that has ever happened to comics. And I feel that way partly because I am on social media, right? I mean, using YouTube is a form of social media. And so I'm just curious, how people approach this and whether people are taking advantage of the technology to be able to reach out to talk to others that are passionate about the same thing that they're passionate about. And that's part of what I was trying to get to here. But what you can see is that about 48% or so say often. 48% or 133 people say often. A healthy amount say rarely. And that's 119 people say rarely. And we did not define what often, never, or rarely means. And sometimes definitions could help because, the words themselves can be very subjective, right? Because rarely means a lot of things depending upon one's interpretation of the word. Never is pretty darn clear, right? I mean, never is I never do it. And we see only about 28%, right? About 10% of the 280 respondents actually say never But they do watch my channel, which is interesting, but they may not consider YouTube to be social media. They may be interpreting social media to be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, that kind of stuff. So again, without the definitions, well, let me restate. Having the definitions may help improve how I am able to interpret the data, but without putting the definitions in there, it's sometimes a little hard. But again, for the sake of brevity, sometimes it's helpful just to kind of keep it a little nebulous, because I'm also not a market researcher by profession. So my next question was, what social media platforms do you use? Because I was curious about that. And you can see Instagram, my favorite and preferred, is only in second place. So Instagram, 157 people out of 259. By far, YouTube is ahead of the pack at 65%. And again, followed by Instagram, and then Facebook is down here at 39%. And the Twitter machine is down here at about 11%. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong number. And then you can kind of see it falls off here. You see some people that call out Regie collects here. Then down here you have Discord and Twitch. Don't talk much online, mostly just watch. Don't use social media. I'm a digital hermit. Well done, whoever said that. Then there's the CGC boards and the CBR forum, a couple of different things. Discord, it's sort of social media. It is indeed social media. So a couple of funny responses down there, but you can see the vast majority up here using what most of us do consider to be social media. So it's just interesting to kind of see how that spread. I am a huge fan of YouTube and also Instagram, not so much the Twitters or the Facebooks, not so much. And yes, I do know that it's Twitter and Facebook, but I prefer to put a little S on the end. So this was an interesting question. And I only asked, I think, this question once, and I didn't go back to it, but I wanted to know whether people felt that we as a community and as a hobby are too focused on speculation. And what we see here is that 39% of people say maybe we're too focused. There are 38% that say, yes, we are indeed too focused on speculation. I mean, that's a pretty even split between the maybes and the yeses, that the no's. There are about 66 individuals that basically say, no, we are not too focused on speculation at all. And you can't read too much into that without asking a couple of follow-up questions, because maybe they don't feel like that. Maybe they are speculators. Maybe they're not paying attention to it as much as other people are. So it's hard to know why they may have answered no to the question. But again, I thought that this was an interesting one to kind of ask. And, it's interesting because if you go back to one of the previous questions, right, it was around, are you a collector, a reader, a speculator / investor? And we saw that there were a lot of people that are collectors and readers, and then also a healthy number of speculators as well. And so it's just kind of interesting to see where people fall out on that spectrum, and then also how they feel a little bit later in the survey. And again, without being able to do some follow-up questions of some of the respondents, it's hard to know how to interpret some of this stuff, but it's interesting data nevertheless to kind of look at. And again, this is something no one else is doing. And so I do absolutely love this kind of thing. So one of my other questions is, do you have any other vices? Do you have any other money bits? Is kind of what this question is. And again, 280 people responded to this and said yes. There were 67% of people that said yes. I have other vices. I collect something other than comics. I am over here in the no bucket. I can only have one vice at a time, and mine is comics. So about 33% of people are like, nope. Nothing else. Comics is all that I do. And so, of course, the next natural question is, what other things do you collect? If you collect some other stuff, what is it? And I don't think that there's anything really surprising here, at least in the top responses. Toys was number one, followed by cards. Oh, no. Toys followed by statues, right? So 81%, 81 people, 42% said toys. Statues was 60 individuals, or 31%, followed by cards, and then it ticks down here to coins and currency. And then we go to stamps at about 8 individuals, or about 4%. You have video games on here, vinyl records, video games, which is probably, I'm not sure why they broke that one apart. Maybe because someone didn't capitalize G in one of it. That's just, again, it's one of those things that, had the program been a little smarter, it would have been able to collapse some of those things. But I don't know what a fig pin is. I'm not sure what that is. Does anybody know what a fig pin is? I've never heard of that. Original comic art, shot glasses, vinyl records, Legos, original art, Star Wars memorabilia. Wow, vintage baseball gloves. That's very specific. That's cool. I don't know what that says. Take up too much. I don't know what that word is. Does anybody want to guess what that word is? Anyone want to guess? Okay. Old video games. And again, a couple of these probably could have been stacked upon one another, because we have a couple of original art, comic art kind of things, a couple of video games in here that definitely would have been collapsed and probably would have made some of these other numbers look a little bit different. So again, we'll continue moving on. As you would imagine, I wanted to definitely know people's ages, and I alluded to this a short while ago. And again, you have an interesting split here, right? Where you have, what is this? Which one's bigger? Okay. So about 97 respondents, or about 35% of people, are age 45 to 54. And then there's another, the next contingent, about 94 individuals are aged 35 to 44, which is interesting. Let me see what that one is. Because again, if you kind of look here, we definitely skew a little older, right? And that might be because of what people talked about before, right? In terms of a lot more disposable income now later in life, a little bit more time. Maybe we aren't out at the bars and partying as much these days. So you definitely see it skewing a little bit, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, and then also 45 to 54. Now, what I will tell you is that there are definitely some parallels potentially between my age, because of my age and maybe who is interested in watching me. Maybe that's why we see some of these numbers that we see, because I kind of fall in that age range. So either I am truly representative of the respondents and the hobby, or it is biased because of who I am and how I am, presenting myself, right? That also can skew some of the data. But we see here 8.6% of people are actually age 55 to 64. So there is definitely a nice group here. And then you can kind of see on the other end, we have some rock star years here, 65 and older. And then we have some youngsters here as well. A handful of youngsters that actually took the time to respond to the survey. So I definitely appreciate all of the respondents, regardless of where you fall on this spectrum. But I definitely appreciate the rock stars. Shout out to all the rock stars that are out there. And then the very last question that I asked here, this is one that I'm a little disappointed in. I'm not sure who this 2.1% of people is that do not subscribe to my channel, but I definitely want to encourage you to take the time to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release here from the channel. But no, seriously, the good news is that a healthy number of people actually do subscribe to the channel, which again is why maybe some of the responses we saw up above may look the way that they do, right? And I will tell you that there were a couple of people that actually shared the survey externally of my website. So there were people that posted it to Facebook and other social media platforms to help drive people to it. So it wasn't truly just people that follow my channel, but you can look at the data and see that a healthy number of the people actually do subscribe to the channel. So again, I like to point out some of these biases because I think they are potentially important, and they may help us to understand why some of the data looks the way that it does. But this was again a pretty fun survey for me to put together. It's interesting to look at some of the data. And again, I'm going to be very curious to see what you all's thoughts are on some of the data that has been presented in this survey. And let me get that off the screen. Because again, what we looked at was essentially my interpretation of some of this data. And I'm going to be curious whether you all had any epiphanies or aha moments as I went through that data. Is there something that I missed? Is there something that we should think about and consider? Is there a better way or a different type of question that we should potentially ask for an additional survey? And so my goal is to kind of do these surveys periodically to kind of see what things look like from period to period. And I may actually go back and draw some comparisons between the previous survey and this one. But it will be some time before we do this thing again. But again, very much interested in people's thoughts, suggestions, and feedback on the survey. So with that, I'm going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen. And if you enjoyed the video, I definitely want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment behind so we can mix it up in the comment section. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram, social media, at Regie, at Regie Collects. And if you want to send me an email, you can do that as well at Regie@regiecollects.com. I totally flubbed that, but hey, I'm having fun over here. Thank you guys and take care.